Hi guys, part 5 of the lecture on the Cold War. I've got to say the same thing again because some people might only watch this part, but remember, you should not just use this lecture for your revision. I cannot go into as much detail as you need. There are slides which I'll put on Show My Homework. We're going to be on slide 25 through to slide 30. It's the final 5 slides of the PowerPoint, looking at Gorbachev's new thinking and the end of the Cold War. Please use your exercise books and your revision guides alongside this lecture, and hopefully it will put kind of your knowledge of these events into some understanding to help you with your exam. So, Gorbachev's new thinking. You should have seen in the last lectures, particularly the last one in, with the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan and détente, the Soviet Union economically were in a pretty grim position, and also America and Ronald Reagan, their president, really had the upper hand. They were outspending the Soviet Union. Their SDI initiative meant that the Soviet Union's weapons were now pretty useless. And it seems like they couldn't really go on much longer. And Gorbachev, the new leader, had a series of new ideas which he felt would kind of improve communism and make it better, and hope that they could go on without kind of having to worry too much about America. A few bits of context for you. In Poland, there was a new trade union called Solidarity. The trade union is an organisation which kind of protects the workers, which were initially banned in 1981 because they got so much popularity. But this group, Solidarity, basically became a rival government to the communist government, and there was huge demonstrations going on in Poland. And again, Gorbachev had to decide whether he wanted to get involved in a kind of a military conflict like Brezhnev had done previously in Czechoslovakia. Martial law had taken place in Poland in 1981, which meant there was a military government and suspension of normal laws. And that was Brezhnev's kind of last action before he died in 1982. But also, the economic situation in the Soviet Union was really, really bad, and large parts of the population in the Soviet Union were really, really struggling. And you'll see some of the pictures on slide 25, which will help kind of show you that. So Gorbachev's new thinking was 3 main policies: Glasnost, Perestroika, and ending the Brezhnev Doctrine. Glasnost, and the easy way to remember it is in the word Glasnost, you can kind of see glass, and that is where they had a policy of openness and transparency. Basically, he encouraged people to speak out if they were angry. If they felt something wasn't right and communist wasn't working, they wanted people to be able to speak out. And I suppose he wanted people to be able to think of better ideas to make communism function. He was a communist and he didn't really want it to end. He just realised it wasn't going very well. There's also Perestroika, which is restructuring the Soviet economy. It included some policies which made capitalism successful. He didn't want to be a completely capitalist country, but he felt with some kind of policies which encouraged trade, it might generate a little bit of money, and by giving some of the poorest people a little bit of profit for themselves, maybe they'd be happier living in a communist country. He also ended the Brezhnev Doctrine. He felt that if they forced people to live under communism, well, clearly they're going to want to rebel. And by ending the Brezhnev Doctrine and no longer threatening other communist countries, maybe they'll kind of live in less fear and actually enjoy their time in the communist bloc. I suppose you could kind of say that he was too positive and he felt that people would choose communism. What he's actually doing is giving all of these nations in the Eastern Bloc the ability to be more capitalist, to speak out. Groups like Solidarity in Poland would have been all over this, and taking away the threat that if any of them did speak out, the other countries in the communist bloc would attack them. So, moving on to slide 28. Sorry, slide 26 and 27 are the same, so ignore that. Going on to slide 28, what we have now is a series of summits, and you might remember this from the lesson. There's 5 summits, but I think you only really need to remember 2 or 3 of them, maybe even just 1. But I'll go through them all anyway. There was the Geneva Summit in 1985, where Gorbachev and Reagan met for the first time. No agreements were made, but they both agreed that actually we want to improve relations. So it was the start, if you like. There was the Reykjavik Summit in 1986. This was after the Chernobyl crisis in the Soviet Union, where a nuclear power plant kind of reacted and it made kind of the Soviet Union really scared of nuclear power, and it was a huge kind of catastrophe. So Gorbachev went into that meeting on the defensive, if you like. Both agreed the USA could not give up SDI. It was already in place, but no agreements were made on kind of reducing weapons at that stage. But there was the Washington Summit in 1987, and this, I think you could say, is one of the main ones. This took place in America, and the Intermediate Range Nuclear Force Treaty, or the INF Treaty, was introduced, and both countries abolished land-based missiles. That was the first agreement when they actually abolished or got rid of weapons. Remember, with the SALT treaties, they only limited, but in this one, they got rid of weapons. The Moscow Summit, another you could say is the main one, announcing the reduction in the Warsaw Pact troops, and Soviet forces would leave Afghanistan. You know, think about it. If there was a reduction in Warsaw Pact troops, that's going to send a message to countries in the Eastern Bloc that, you know, if we do have a revolution or we try to leave, there's a smaller army to actually stop us from doing it. So that would have certainly given confidence to countries like Poland, Hungary, etc. And then the Malta Summit in 1989, which effectively ended the Cold War. Gorbachev met with the new president of America, President George Bush, and they kind of agreed that was it. It was all going to be over. There was a few things during those summits which really, really signified the end of the Cold War. On slide 29, we've got the collapse of the satellite states. Kind of the opposite of what happened in, I think it was either lecture number 1 or 2, where the satellite states were building up. And it's where those satellite states collapsed. You will need to use your revision guide or your exercise books to look at these in more detail. But in May 1989, Hungary became free of communism. In June 1989, Poland became free of communism. And between September and November in 1989, East Germany became free of communism. And actually, it was signified by the Berlin Wall being destroyed, and quite funnily, David Hasselhoff singing on the Berlin Wall a song about freedom. The collapse of the satellite states itself, I think there is enough there to have an entire narrative account question on it. But I suppose for your knowledge of the events, look in your revision guides and look at what happens in each country. But in terms of your understanding, I think those summits are really important, because it was clear with the measures put in place at those summits, with the reduction of the Warsaw Pact troops, banning nuclear weapons, some of the land-based weapons, that those countries, those satellite states, had the confidence to move away from the communist bloc without a fear of being invaded like they had done previously with the Prague Spring and the Hungarian uprising. So that signifies the end of the Cold War. The Berlin Wall was over, which literally ended the divide between East and West Berlin, and the people were free to flood from the east into the west. The Warsaw Pact ended, so the agreement between the communist countries who were there to protect each other, that was over. And with the collapse of the satellite states, Europe was reunited. And sadly for Gorbachev, it ended with him kind of falling from power. In his own attempt to make communism better, he'd actually sowed the seeds for its collapse, to which he was devastated, but nonetheless, it seemed like it was happening. So that is the final part of the Cold War revision lecture. Hopefully that's been helpful. Like I said, you cannot rely on this completely. You must practice the different types of questions. In the back of your book, you have the skills organizer and the mark scheme for each of the 3 types of questions. You need to make sure that you have got a full comprehensive set of revision notes, whether it's flashcards or mind maps. And if there's any parts which you're unsure about, hopefully this lecture would help put those into context. Good luck with your exam, and you know where I am if you have any questions. Good luck.